Here's what's coming up on the world today. The death toll is mounting from the violent protests going on in South Africa, which started as supporters of former President Jacob Zuma called for his release. A fire rages the coronavirus ward of a hospital in Iraq, killing more than 40 people inside. And the protests continue in and outside of Cuba against the president's handling of the coronavirus pandemic and the economy. Welcome to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani. We begin in South Africa, where 30 people at least have lost their lives during violent protests in the country ever since former President Jacob Zuma was taken in by the police last week. He did hand himself over. The police have arrested at least 800 people, despite President Cyril Ramaphosa's address on Monday calling for calm. Several townships in Johannesburg are still gripped with the looting and destruction of property. Here's what our crew found out when they visited other parts of South Africa, such as KwaZulu-Natal.
This is today in Diepkloof, Soweto, Johannesburg. The mayhem has spread, and a looter stampede in Meadowlands, also in Soweto, has boosted the fatalities by 11 today. 19 of the people who are dead are in Johannesburg, Gauteng. According to the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, Sihle Zikalala, the number of fatalities recorded in his province stands at 26.
The latest fatalities confirmed by security cluster in KwaZulu-Natal is standing at 26. These were people that were killed during stampede as protesters ran riot.
This is what is left of the Diepkloof Mall here in Soweto.
The damage that is here is massive. Millions and millions of rents. That is it's not going to recover anytime soon. But we'll see as time goes on that how we're going to recover.
They are busy looting, so we don't know what's happening around South Africa. We want our country to cool down so that we come again and enjoy ourselves. Because if things goes like this, we're gonna lose everything.
Same story for the Vosloorus Mall. Looting has been going on since yesterday, and this morning it was in full swing with so many people arrested by the police that came on the scene. President Cyril Ramaphosa's passionate plea to the nation on Monday night appeared to have fallen on deaf ears, despite the announcement that soldiers will be deployed to support the police. After the president's speech and after several meetings, assessment meetings, the security cluster ministers addressed the nation.
The current situation on the ground is under strong surveillance, and we will ensure that it does not deteriorate any further. We cannot allow anyone to make a mockery of our democratic state, and we have instructed the law enforcement agencies to double their efforts to stop the violence and to increase deployment on the ground.
While the security cluster was briefing on national TV, nothing much seemed to have changed on the streets. We returned here to the Alexandra Township, where the police has continued in their running battle with the people who have been looting. Behind me you can see the billowing smoke from yet another building that has been set alight by people who have been looting. Formal and informal business groups, as well as the thousands who will join the unemployment market following this, are lamenting. No one knows whether tomorrow will be calmer or not. What's sure is that the road to recovering from this will be a long one. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
And in Iraq, authorities say more than 60 people have died following a fire at a coronavirus isolation ward at a hospital in the city of Nasiriyah. The cause of the fire is not yet clear, but reports say it began after an oxygen tank exploded. The country's prime minister has ordered the arrest of the head of the hospital.
The fire started on Monday night at the Al Hussein Coronavirus Hospital in the southern city of Nasiriyah. State-run news agencies cited health ministry officials saying that search operations were continuing through the night. After the fire was brought under control, many patients were reportedly trapped inside. Initial police reports had suggested that an oxygen tank explosion inside the hospital's COVID-19 ward was likely the cause of the fire. As rescuers combed the smoke-charred building in search of more bodies, Prime Minister Mustafa Al-Kadhimi held urgent meetings with senior ministers and ordered the suspension and arrest of health and civil defense managers in Nasiriyah. The manager of the hospital was also suspended and ordered to be arrested. Other government officials, such as the Speaker of the Parliament, Mohammed Al-Habousi, said on social media that the blaze was clear proof of the failure to protect Iraqi lives and that it was time to put an end to the catastrophic failure. The coronavirus ward was a new one in the hospital. It had 70 beds and was built just 3 months ago. One health official says it had at least 63 people inside when the fire began.
We're in Cuba now, where protests have been going on because of the economy as well as the country's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Police have arrested dozens of people, though, after thousands joined in what has become the biggest protest in the country for decades against the communist government. It's rare to find the unauthorized public gatherings in the country, but images seen on social media show what appears to be security forces detaining, beating, and even pepper spraying some of the protests. Now, interestingly, leaders in Cuba's Latin American neighboring countries are chiming in support of the protests. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro said on social media all the support and solidarity to the Cuban people. Today, they bravely call for an end to the cruel dictatorship, which for decades has massacred freedom by selling the illusion of a socialist paradise. Let democracy flourish in Cuba and bring better days to its people. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro blamed the United States for the protests, calling on Washington to lift sanctions on the Caribbean nation. He says if the United States and the extremist opposition really want to help the Cuban people, then immediately lift all sanctions and the blockade against the Cuban people from here, from the negotiating table, from the presidential palace, as I said on the telephone with President Miguel Diaz-Canel. I offer complete support for the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, to the people of Cuba, to the revolutionary government of Cuba from Venezuela. He says brothers in the good times and brothers in the bad. Well, Spain's government is calling for the release of its journalist, Camila Acosta, who was reporting during the protest. She was detained by security forces. Acosta describes herself as an independent Cuban journalist. He had been writing for ABC newspaper and uploading photos of the unrest on social media. So far, at least 100 protesters, activists, and independent journalists have been detained nationwide since Sunday. Let's talk to the VOA's Alonso Castillo in Havana. Alonso, thank you for joining us on the program. Great to see you. But it's been a long time we've seen protests like this in Cuba, quite unprecedented at least, also spreading to other parts of the world, in other countries. But I guess the scale, the timing, of the protests, all of this escaped, the authorities' notice, right?
Good afternoon. According to experts, these protests have been spontaneously, when they started happening on Sunday, through social media. Different Cubans along the island in different cities started to go out to the streets and protest on what was going on regarding the lack of food, medicines, vaccines. And so, once it happens, the authorities, the president, Miguel Diaz-Canel, came out and said that people should go out to the streets and defend the communist rule that has been Cuba for the past decades.
I want to talk about the international calls that are going out in support of these protests. We just heard what the Venezuelan president, the Brazilian president Jair Bolsonaro said, supporting the Cuban people, and then Nicolas Maduro standing behind the Cuban government. declaring his support for them. What does it mean for the region, this protest going on?
Yeah, well, the support that Venezuela has of Cuba is fundamental, especially on the economic side. And according to what's happening on the area, well, you have different countries that align themselves to what the kind of government that Cuba has. President Maduro and his former president of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, have always had a very strong tie to Cuba, and Cuba is very dependent on Venezuela. Yet Venezuela, as well as other countries such as Nicaragua, are very dependent on the ideology and on the military intelligence that Cuba has on different countries.
Yeah, and also give us a sense, though, of the situation just before the protests. I know that Cuba had been under a number of sanctions from the United States, and some blame those sanctions for putting Cuba in the economic position it is in right now.
The economic situation in Cuba, according to the director of the National Institute of Cuba here in Miami, talked to us about how important it was that to be aware that the lack of food, the lack of medicine, the lack of vaccinations is not something new in this country, but has been exacerbated by the coronavirus crisis that currently Havana and Cuba has the highest rate in that country and is breaking records in infections as well as deaths. So all these crisis when it comes to health has exacerbated the need for medicine, for food, for vaccines, and that is why this social unrest is beginning to happen across the island.
Alonso, thank you for filling us in on the situation in Cuba. And of course, those protests continue today, we understand, also in other parts of the hemisphere. Thanks again.
Thank you.
We have more stories coming up on the world today, including this one. Get your tissues or your handkerchiefs ready. It's happy ending for a father reunited with his abducted son after 24 years of searching for him. Welcome back. You're still watching The World Today. In the United States, dozens of Democratic lawmakers left Texas on Monday as part of an orchestrated move to derail their Republican colleagues' efforts to pass new voting restrictions and other conservative measures during a special legislative session. Calling for an airplane headed to Washington, D.C. Monday afternoon, Texas State Representative Alex Dominguez said that nearly everyone in the House of Representatives' 67-member Democratic caucus had fled the state. And that exodus is intended to deny the legislature the quorum needed to approve any of the measures on Republican Governor Greg Abbott's special session agenda, including bills restricting abortion access and blocking transgender students from competing in athletics that correspond with their gender identity.
We are determined to kill this bill in this special session, which will end on August the 7th. And we will stay out until then in order to do that. We are going to use that time to plead with our friends and our colleagues and our leaders in the Congress that the time is now. There is no more time. You must pass strong federal voter protection legislation, and you must do it now. You must do it before the August recess. Our democracy is at stake. That's what's on the line. That is why we are here. And now it's my privilege to introduce.
We had no other option. There was nothing left to give. And so we took a stand and we left the state of Texas because that was the best and the right thing to do at the right time. And let me tell you this, who decided that one constitutional right deserved greater deference than the other? I'll tell you who, that's Texas. Texas, the Republican legislature decided that your right to carry a gun was more important than your precious right to vote.
Yeah. So we've been following closely developments in Afghanistan after the withdrawal of U.S. troops leaving the Afghan forces to their own face to face the Taliban, which is fast gaining ground in the country. Today we're seeing the encounter of a convoy of Afghan special forces struck by Taliban fire in the southern province of Kandahar. That's one of the many provinces to see a surge in offensives by the Islamist insurgents. And this is the theater of war right now. That video was filmed by Reuters news agency from inside a Humvee operating in the outskirts of Kandahar, showing the vehicle hit by fire from Taliban fighters who were unleashing RPGs and heavy machine gun fire at Afghan security forces. To give us an idea of what the Afghan forces are facing with the Taliban. Meanwhile, former President Hamid Karzai says serious peace talks will soon begin in the country, calling on the government not to waste opportunities for peace. He, however, did not specify details about the talks, but peace talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government have nominally been continuing in Qatar's capital. Inshallah. Officials, however, say they're making little progress. Violence has surged, as we know, since the U.S. President Joe Biden announced in April that American troops would withdraw by September 11, ending 20 years in Afghanistan. The Taliban have made a fresh push to surround cities and gain territory, emboldened by the departure of the foreign forces. All parts of the UK are considering lifting COVID-19 restrictions, and that includes Scotland, which is set to move to level 0 of the restrictions on July 17th as well. But the mandatory use of face coverings will remain in place for some time, so the government says. A move to level 0 means that more people will be allowed to meet indoors and attend weddings and funerals, but limits on outdoor meetings are to be maintained, and the return of workers to offices is to be delayed. Here's more in the Global Update.
Scotland's announcements on the restrictions come as the British government confirmed on Monday that most COVID-19 restrictions in England will end next week, despite surging cases caused by the Delta variant, first identified in India. Most restrictions are set to end on July the 19th as part of the final step, or Step 4, of England's roadmap out of the lockdown. Details of Step 4 include no limits on social contact to allow people to gather in groups of any size, removing the 1 meter plus rule in almost all settings, and no capacity on large-scale events. Russia has reported 780 coronavirus deaths, the most confirmed in a single day since the beginning of the pandemic, as well as 24,702 new cases nationwide. Russia is in the grips of a surge in cases that authorities have blamed on the contagious Delta variant and the slow rate of vaccinations. Moscow, where the mayor has said that the situation is beginning to stabilize, reported 4,900.
We apologize for not bringing you the remaining part of that report. You can hear more on the global situation at top of the hour on our coronavirus pandemic update. But temperatures have been rising. They're still high in many parts of the United States. Hundreds of residents in the Klamath Falls in south central Oregon were under mandatory evacuation orders on Monday. And in an unusual step, county officials said residents who defy the evacuation order could face citations or arrest. Residents who fled from the so-called bootleg fire in and around the Fairmont-Winnemere National Forest recounted a harrowing escape from the blaze after being told to evacuate their homes because of imminent danger from the flames.
Moving at 3 to 5 miles an hour.
We're sitting there watching the smoke. We've seen the flames coming. We don't know how far the flames were, but it was, you could see them. I mean, it was hungry. It was mean. It was ugly. And it was right there where we could watch it. This is my first wildfire, and I'm going to tell you, it is scary. It's enough to make you cry. It's enough to make you sick to your stomach. because you don't know if you're going to be the one that loses your house, or you sit there and you watch your neighbor lose their house and there's nothing you can do about it.
You know, before you hear reports of this and these people there, and you go, oh, poor people, oh, that's horrible. But when you're with them, experiencing the same thing, and hearing stories, gives you a different outlook on life, gives you a different outlook on compassion.
Temperatures are rising in Europe as well. The heat wave in Moscow, however, recorded another temperature record as the main weather station in the capital, Moscow, reported its highest temperature of, since 1936 at 32.7 degrees Celsius. Thermometer placed on Tuesday on Red Square showed even higher temperature, as 37 degrees Celsius. The capital's daytime temperatures are forecast at 30 to 35 degrees Celsius in the coming days, and could break records on 3 days this week that have stood since 1936, 1951, and 2010. Just last month, the air temperature in Moscow reached 34.8 degrees Celsius. That's the hottest day recorded in the month of June in 42 years of monitoring, according to authorities. Well, to tell you how hot it has been in Moscow, this chocolate Kremlin tower melted in Red Square as the air temperature hit another record, reaching 32.7 degrees Celsius. That's, there it is. It's melted right under the sun, literally. And we end with a happy ending, coming from a persistent Chinese father who's been emotionally reunited with his long-lost son following an agonizing 24-year-long search to track down his abducted boy. The story of Guo Ngantang, a now 51-year-old farmer from East China's Shandong province, has struck the hearts of the nation, with Guo's determined efforts to find his son even being made into a movie 6 years ago. However, a happy new chapter was added on Sunday as Guo's son, Guo Zhizhen, who had been trafficked to the neighboring Henan province back in 1997, was reunited with his family in Shandong, Liaocheng City. Such a moment has been widely shared online, with netizens across the country sending warm messages and offering congratulations to the family.
成功在河南发现疑似国新镇的线索，根据公安部指令，河南公安机关采集相关人员 DNA 信息进行复核检验，最终。
你得好好的疼着，好好的疼着。
Pretty emotional there. 24 years, that's a really long time. Well, just to point out that Guo's son was abducted in 1997 at the age of 2. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.